Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I have an initial problem in taking the floor in front of you. You know, I am an Italian, and everybody knows that Italians are too talkative. I am a professor, and most students think that professors are too talkative, and a politician. And you know how much politicians can speak. So I empower you, please, to stop me when I have overcome all possible levels of distraction. I congratulate you on this beautiful cultural event that you have prepared. Good ideas, sound ideas, perfect organization, beautiful girls. I can see them from this vantage point. Very well done. And you made only one error, that is inviting me to talk on the power of art and music to overcome cultural barriers. I shall try to put together a few reflections. The first reflection is that everything that happens in life happens in one place at one time. The Germans would say that it has a Sitzimleben. A Sitzimleben means that you never see totality. You always see one part of totality from a specific vantage point. This does not mean that what you see is not true. I do not want to understand this in the sense of moral or cultural relativism. What I see, what I have experienced in my life is true. And I have no doubt that what I have seen is true. Only I am not the owner of truth. I have not truth in my pocket. I do not possess truth. Truth possesses me. And other persons may have seen elements of truth from a different vantage point that I did not see. That's the reason why, in order to reach truth, we must talk to one another. That's the issue of dialogue. Dialogue means from the Greek, logein means to talk, and dia means one another, from one to the other and back. Once I was in Japan, in Kyoto, and I saw the Garden of the 15 Stones. It is one cultural monument that is fundamental for the understanding of Japanese culture. It is a garden, as the name says. And in this garden, there are 15 stones. The peculiarity of the garden is that there is no vantage point in the garden from which you can see all of the 15 stones. Whatever the point you are in, you can see only some of them, never all of them. And you go through, and in the end, you sit. And if you want, you can talk to one of the monks who are there. It is within a monastery, of course. It is the Zen Buddhism chief cultural monument. What is the meaning? The meaning is that you see truth, not all of truth, a part of truth, a perspective on truth. And if you want to know what you do not see, you must talk to somebody else who sees the same reality from another vantage point. This teaches us the importance of truth. It is a witness against relativism, but it's also a witness against dogmatism. Very often in our culture, it seems that you either are a dogmatist or a relativist. Either there is truth, and I possess truth, and my truth is truth, or there is no truth, and whatever is said, well, it can be said, and it is equally true and equally false. If you look to the cultural policies that we have in Europe today, or that we have had in Europe in these last years, you can see that both these attitudes are present. On the one hand, you have assimilationist policies. People come from abroad, from here to Germany. First came the Italians, later the Spaniards and the Portuguese, and later came the Turks, and perhaps tomorrow people from Ceylon or any other place. And we have always had two options. One option is you must become one of us. You must accept our truth, and that's all. I would say there is not a typically German approach. There is a typically French approach. You come to France, you must become a Frenchman. You must become a son of the French Revolution. And whatever else you are is meaningless, has no public relevance. This is the assimilationist approach. You just become one of us. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. It can work when the culture you come from is very similar to French culture, when the points of contact are many. I don't know whether all of you know who is Yves Montand. Do you? What is Yves Montand as a nationality? Who knows? He's an Italian. He's an Italian who has become a Frenchman. If you are an Italian, you can become a Frenchman. I would add, but this is in contrast with the assimilationist theory, that you can become a Frenchman remaining an Italian. But we will deal at length with this point later. But if you come from a culture that is more far away, more different, then it does not work so easily. You have Algerian people who live in France since long, and they do not feel as Frenchmen, and they are not felt as Frenchmen. By the way, it is the same problem with the Turks here in Germany. It was mentioned before. So assimilationism does not work always, on the one hand, and people may resent it. Does the fact that I have a different culture mean that I have a smaller value as a human being? Is there an inequality of cultures? And the host culture has the right of suppressing other cultures? It did not work anyway. We have seen it in the revolts, in the barriers. It does not work. We need something else. Another approach is the multiculturalist approach. We live different culture side by side, without mingling, without influencing one another, without constituting a broader culture that encompasses the different cultures that participate in it. That was the English model, and to a lesser extent also the German model. We live side by side, but can we become one nation if we just live side by side? And does this model hold when the number of people coming from abroad becomes larger, when they are not just tiny minorities, but significant parts of our people? By the way, can we speak of our people? Or shall we speak of different peoples living within the same territory? Another problem of multiculturalism is that it tries to sever culture from space. It is natural for us to give a meaning to the space we live in. Look at this room. There are many signs, many symbols that give to this room an identity, starting with the flags, but also the paintings that you find on the background and the photos and so forth. People give meaning to the space they live in. People cannot find themselves at home in a space that has no meaning. A friend of mine, a great friend of mine, the late Richard John Neuhaus, wrote a magnificent book that has become a cornerstone in the reflection on these issues in the United States. that was the naked public square. The public square cannot be naked. If the public square is naked, then I feel that I have no identity. I fall in a condition of anomia. Anomia means I live in a space in which there is no rule. And this space is not a space I can inhabit in. And it is not a space in which I can feel my living experience. I must become anonymous as the space is anonymous. By the way, we have lived this condition of estrangement, of alienation. The Germans would say Entfremdung. It is a word well known to German philosophy. We have lived in this condition of alienation for a long while. And we have resented when people coming from abroad have used the public square. They wanted to be present in the public square, and we have resented this as an offense. And this has compelled us to ask ourselves the question, well, they are, for instance, Muslims. What are we? They have an identity that wants to be present in the public square. What is our identity? What has become of us? And this has brought us back to think about our cultural heritage. Because the public square cannot be a place without culture. Look to the public square in the typical Italian city. In the typical European city, what will you find? You will find a church, and you will find the mayor house, the symbol of the state, the political symbol, and the religious symbol. How can we manage to preserve our identity in the presence of other cultures that refuse to be assimilated, but at the same time don't feel at ease in a naked public square, in a public space in which there are no symbols and no meanings? I think that this is the main reason why multiculturalism has come to a crisis. How can we get out of this crisis? It is a cultural crisis, it is a political crisis. I think that in order to find a new policy, we must rethink what is culture. We must have the courage to ask the question, what is culture? And I think that the concept of culture with which we have worked up to now was fundamentally wrong. This is derived from ethnology and from cultural anthropology, and mainly from the cultural anthropology of the 70s. It was the structuralist cultural anthropology, and people thought that man is made by culture. It was an anti-humanist cultural anthropology that considered man to be the result of cultural pressures. There is some truth in it, but it is not the whole truth. When I was more or less your age, I remember meeting one great French psychoanalyst. He was completely crazy, but he was a man of genius. His name was Jacques Lacan. Perhaps some of you have heard of him. And once he came to hold a seminar, and he started with the question, who speaks when I speak? Silence. Nobody dared answer. At the end, one took his courage with both hands and said, well, when I speak, I do speak. He was submerged by the reproach of Lacan. No! When I speak, what speaks is my national culture. In the sense that I use my language, a language that is not my private language. It is a common language, the language of the community to which I pertain. When I speaks my social class, my university, the studies that I had, my family, and all the influences that have come to produce that object that is me. This is true. Very often, we think that the I, das Ich, that is the center of German philosophy, we think that the I, or the ego, is something that exists by itself. No. Sigmund Freud has taught us that we carry within ourselves the heritage of the past. And our I is formed through the confrontation, the dialogue, the conflict with our father and with our mother. So it is true. We are made by culture. But there is one other side of the coin, and the other side of the coin is that we make culture. Think of your own personal experience. You are created through the influences of your family. The main carrier of culture is the family, of your family, of the school you have had, and many other elements. But you are also made by something else. And I shall call this something else with the word encounter. You meet somebody, you are impressed by this somebody, you become a friend of this somebody, and this is a new experience that shapes your existence. You fall in love with somebody, and this somebody may belong to a different culture, and he becomes a part of yourself, although he will never be only a part of yourself. He or she will always transcend what you are. He will always remain a mystery, partial mystery to you. And you have to synthesize the values that you have received, culture as tradition, and the experience you have now. Without culture as tradition, you could never find an orientation in the world. But if tradition becomes a prison, and you cannot enter into contact with something that is out of this tradition, then you become a prisoner. Tradition is like a house. So is the person that is imbued with tradition and with culture. A house without doors and without windows is not a house, it's a cave. Of course, a house without walls is not a house. It is just an empty space. Culture must have walls and must have doors and must have windows and must make the contact with others possible. Culture is not an object. Culture is a system of relations. And culture is not something that is fixed once and forever. Culture is always changing. In front of new challenges, culture has to give an answer. And the answer implies change. And culture is not monolithic. Within the same culture, you always have conflicting perspectives. In front of the challenge of something new, of the novelty of life, culture must evolve. In which direction? There is always a plurality of directions in which culture may evolve. And there is also always struggle within a culture. You can imagine that culture is a monolith, a block. It is not. In front of the challenge of the encounter with another culture, there are many possible answers within a culture. One answer is to renounce to its own identity. It is not a good answer. And it's the answer pretended by assimilationist policies. Another possible answer is to defend yourself. And then the culture becomes rigid, and the center of the culture becomes the struggle with another culture. It is the perspective of the clash of civilizations that has been illustrated by Samuel Huntington in a famous book. That is not false, it is true, but it is one side of truth, because cultures can clash, but cultures can also enter into a dialogue with one another. If you want to speak of a dialogue of cultures, then you have to consider one element that has been almost completely forgotten. This element is human nature. On which basis can cultures talk to one another? Because they share a common human nature. There is a living experience that judges cultures. And you cannot pretend, in the name of cultural relativism, that all cultures are equal. That's false. They have equal dignity, but in their dialogue, taking the measure of human nature, then you can say, for instance, that, well, the sacrifice of human beings in Aztec culture was bad. It is humanly bad. And the equal value of all cultures, in principle, does not mean that you have to accept this as a possible cultural variation. The mutilations of the sexual organs of young girls is bad, should not be accepted, because it is bad. The impossibility for a girl to choose her own husband is not a cultural matter. It is bad in itself, because it is against natural human rights. Let's deal for a while on this idea of nature. We speak of language, and language is the first carrier of culture. But there are really existing historical languages, like English, the language that I am speaking here, more or less, what I think to be English, and there are natural languages. One of the centers of the old theory of culture was the fact that language was artificial, language determined the culture, and you cannot communicate beyond the borders of a culture. But there are natural languages. Can you speak of one natural language? The ambassador did. Music is a natural language. Music, there is a peculiar relation obtaining between sounds and certain succession and scansions of sounds, between rhythms and peculiar human emotions. Music can stir emotions in an audience that is made of people who do not belong to the same culture. And if you define music through internet or through TV or through radio, this may create a community of people that goes beyond the limits of culture, of each specific national culture. Music is a natural language. Can you imagine of another natural language? Can't you? Dancing, very good, excellent. Well, I wanted to come to dancing a little bit later, but it is true. I shall say more broadly, it is the language of the body. All girls know the language of the body. And when they smile has a meaning. It is a message. It is a language. And there are many ways of smiling. And you must be very careful to convey the proper meaning through your smile. Because if somebody equivocates, the result might cause problems. It might become a problem. So there is a language of the body, smiling, but the gesture, and there is a kind of art that is immediately derived from this, that is the mime. There is a mimicry and there is the mime. And this stands at the beginning of other forms of art. Dancing is a language of the body, and also theater. In theater you have the word. That's true. So you have also historically constituted language, but you have also the body. The man who perhaps has taught more deeply the essence of theater in our generation, Eugenio Barba, he has created a kind of theater of the body. The bodily expression is a fundamental element of the art of theater and of cinema. We have here the Berlinale. For many years, cinema could work perfectly without the word. And also the word is imbued, embedded within gestual expression. We Italians know this better than other people. But when I speak, I convey a meaning, And the meaning is conveyed through words, but also through gestures. You know the difference between yes, yes. There are two different meanings conveyed through the same word. And the word conveys not only meanings, but expressions, but feelings, but emotions. Let me recall here another great theorist of theater, Kotlarczyk. Are there any Poles here? Oh, a Polish woman. Kotlarczyk was the founder of the Theater of the Living Word. And it was a theater of the word, but of the living word. And the living word means that the act of uttering a word conveys meaning and emotion. Cinema, theater, dance, mime, music. All these elements cut across cultural barriers. There is a fundamental semiotic, that is science of the signs and meanings of theater, that cuts across different styles of theater. Of course, German theater, Roman theater, Ceylon theater are different, but there are some common elements, all derived from the language of the body and from different variations of the language of the body. And this is intercultural, can be immediately understood by people who do not have the same cultural codes. There are natural codes that come before the cultural codes. Be careful. I am not meaning that you can sever nature from culture. We have said before that the main instrument of culture is the language. A great linguist, Noam Chomsky, you Americans say Chomsky, but it should be said Chomsky because he's a Polish man or an Ukrainian, I don't know, but originally it comes from this language. He has developed the generative grammatic. What is generative grammatic? All grammatics of different languages are variations on a common structure. You can never spell out the common structure. It is always contained in one variation. But when you learn a language, you make a double move from the grammatic of your language to the underlying systemic grammatic, and then to the grammatic of the other language. In the same way, this holds true also for culture in general. There is a common layer upon which all cultures grow. And this common layer is present in the different cultures and makes the communication of cultures possible, as well as the generative grammatic makes the translation of languages possible. It is, and this enlarges the sphere of our considerations. Because it does so because not only natural language cut across cultural barriers, but also human experiences conveyed through natural languages and through non-natural languages, they all have the capacity of acquiring meaning beyond the cultural barriers. Oh, by the way, for reasons of time, I'm not dealing here with visual arts, but it is quite apparent that when you see the Pietà of Michelangelo, this is a natural symbol that reaches you, whatever the culture to which you belong. And the same holds true for painting and architecture and so forth. Art is the result of a culture, but at the same time transcends the borders and the limits of a culture. We were saying languages can be translated from one another. And in different cultural environments, you find that real masterpieces of art can enter and have a tremendous impact. Let us make one example. All of you know the story of Romeo and Juliet. The experience of falling in love is one typical transcultural experience that creates broader communities, and everybody understands it. Not by chance, most movies are centered around a love story, the difficulties for getting together, and the struggles to overcome the difficulties, and so forth. This has a profound meaning. Our psychic experience is structured around some fundamental centers. One of them is exactly the experience of falling in love, and later of being in love, of having children, the relation husband-wife, the relation mother-children, father-children also. By the way, it may be interesting to note, this time in favor of structuralism, that the father of structuralist theories, Claude Lévi-Strauss, has seen very clearly this function that overcomes the border of culture. In his famous book, Les structures élémentaires de la parenté, Lévi-Strauss has shown that in the center of human civilization is the fact that men meet women from different groups. The rule of isogamy. Isogamy means you do not get married in your family. You do not get married with your sister or with your cousin, but you have to look for a wife beyond the borders of your family group. And what is the result? The children are born who belong to more than one group, to more than one culture. My name is Rocco Buttiglione. I belong to the family or to the clan of the Buttiglione. That was my father. But I belong to the family and to the clan of the Pedone. That was my mother. And I am equally at home in two different contexts. And through marriage, greater communities arise. Do you know the story of the rape of the Sabinians? It is a story that stands at the beginning of the history of Rome. When Romulus founded Rome, his people were all males. They had no wives. And there was a celebration with the Sabinians, and they went there, and when the Sabinians were with an alcoholic level very high, they took the women and ran away. Of course, the Sabinians were not happy about it, and they want to have back their daughters, and they gathered together, they armed themselves, and after a while, when the good season came, they went to recover their daughters from the Romans with the good intention of killing all the Romans. And the Romans armed themselves and went to struggle against the Sabinians. But the battle did not take place because the women did not want to see their husbands killed by their fathers and did not want to see their fathers killed by their husbands. And the women brought the two peoples together and they became one people. It is, of course, a legend, but there is a profound truth in it. The children belonged to the Sabinians and to the Romans. And this is the way in which broader communities have always been born. In the classic world, this was the phenomenon called synecism. Synecism comes from the Greek syun oikeo, to live together. At the beginning of all great classic cities, Athens, Rome, there is always an history of synecism. Different peoples are bound together by the fact of marrying with each other, the rite of marriage, and the veneration of a common ancestor, and art as the instrument through which this communication is brought in the depth of human experience. Think of Athens. You have the cult of the common ancestor, you have the temple, that is a work of art, and you have the tragedy. The tragedy is what binds the people together, a liturgy that has a religious meaning, but also an artistic meaning, in which the fundamental meanings of human experience are elaborated and put at the basis of the specific civilization, the specific Greek civilization. This helps us to understand why natural languages can go beyond the borders. Because a natural language, in a certain sense, is a rehearsal of the fundamental experience of the culture that has been expressed through certain culturally determined forms, but now is lived in statu nascenti, that is, as if it happened for the first time. Dialogue with other cultures, the experiences we have mentioned, renew culture, and at the same time challenge culture. They renew culture. You can better understand these experiences because you already have a culture, but on the other hand, they drive the culture out of its own limits. Well, I can stop here. Just one consideration more. We have a problem, a political problem. Multiculturalism is not good, does not work anymore. Assimilationism, we have already seen the limits of assimilationism. I think we should go along another path. I shall call it integrationism. That is, different cultures may be integrated with one another. They must enter into a dialogue. They must respect each other. They must become friends. They have different roles, of course. It was the problem of the public space. Do we want a public space in which only the symbols of one culture are allowed? Do we want a public space in which no symbols of any culture are allowed? Perhaps it is even worse. Can we imagine of a public space in which all symbols of all cultures are allowed? Not in an abstract, theoretical way. Sometimes I hear people, well, we are in a global world. We must allow our young people to be exposed to all possible influences. So we want Christian symbols, Jewish symbols, Islamic symbols, Buddhist symbols, and so forth. This does not have any real meaning. You must work at the integration of cultures on a concrete historical basis, starting with the cultures that are really there. And they have rights because they are there. It does not make sense to expose people to cultural symbols that are not here, live in another part of the world. But we have Christians, we have Jews, we have Islamists. In some countries we have a certain number of Buddhists. According to the different environments, and also according to the participation of different cultures in a certain people, you can find a way of making the public square available to all of them. And I am a Christian, I am a Catholic, a stubborn one, I must say, but I do not feel offended when I see Jewish symbols. Once I was invited to the Feast of Hanukkah, and I participated in the feast, in the liturgy. This is not true. I have not enough Hebrew in order to really participate, but I tried to participate as much as I could. And I did not feel offended because I gave to those symbols a high value, perhaps not a religious value, a cultural value, or perhaps also a religious value. There is a complicated situation, a question that regards the specific theological relation between Judaism and Christianity. But in any case, I could give them a high cultural value. And they were the symbols of my friends. And I was happy to participate in their feast, and they were happy to have me in their feast. So we must create a relation of hospitality. We feel that it is good that you are here, and we want to learn from your culture, and we want to tell you our culture. I think we should work in this direction. And I think it is apparent that art, music, natural languages, common human archetypes have a fundamental role in order to make it possible. And extremely important is the role of artists, of musicians. It is a challenge. Nobody guarantees that the integration will succeed. But the alternative is the clash. And so we have to try and make our best in order to make an integrationist policy possible. It is possible. We cannot say for sure that we will succeed, but we must, as often in life and in history, bet on what is the best possibility that stands in front of us. Thank you for your attention. I consider a privilege the fact that nobody of you has fallen asleep.